So, the Traitors UK is back for Season 3, and it's just as chaotic as ever.
Oh, no!
Bonkers accusations, biases, herd mentality, and all the joys of social dynamics.
You save lives during the day, you kill people at night. So you're basically calling me like Harold Shipman or something?
No, bro.
That's a bit ordered, mate.
The Traitors is a psychological game show in which contestants are invited to a Scottish castle where 3 of them are secretly picked to play the role of the traitors, with the power to choose someone to murder each night, effectively kicking that person off the game. It is the job of everyone else, the faithfuls, to try and figure out who amongst them these silent assassins are. Each evening the players all meet at the round table to discuss their suspicions and vote one player to banish based on who they think the traitors might be. More often than not, they end up voting out other faithfuls because their suspicions are totally misguided. Yeah. It all slowly whittles down to the final players where everybody remaining at the end gets a cut of the prize money. However, if any of the remaining players are traitors, they take all of the money and nobody else gets anything. And the problem is, none of them ever seem to understand it. Nobody ever has a clue what they're doing. Nobody gets this game. I'm a therapist. I've decided that makes me entitled to talk about this for some reason. I do think I've got something really good to say though. We're going to talk about the big problem here.
It's time to get the castle ready.
So there is going to be some spoilers for some of the contestants of Season 3, by the way. At the time of recording this, there's only 6 episodes out, so I'm obviously not spoiling the end, and I'm only going to mention a few specific moments. So the thing is, the job of the Faithfuls is, of course, to use all of their wits and observations to figure out which players among them are the traitors, to scour the playing field for whatever evidence they can find, and inevitably, there rarely is any evidence. Inevitably, the traitors are very careful about how they behave. And that's kind of what's most interesting about this show. The ways people then act in the absence of evidence, the ways people respond to the total uncertainty of their situation. I fundamentally don't know for certain who the traitors are. How do I respond to that fact? But what's doubly interesting actually is that occasionally there is evidence. Occasionally traitors slip up, and you'd think that would make the game very simple, spotting the evidence and acting on that, but it doesn't. In episode 1 of Season 3, the host Claudia takes a moment to address the traitors in the room at the start of this game, and Linda here, who is a traitor, can't help snapping her head in Claudia's direction.
Traitors.
It's not conclusive proof, but it is still evidence. It's still as good a sign as you're going to get, and Jake here clocks this, sees Linda's head turn, and Jake quite sensibly then confronts her at a time where she's feeling least defensive, doing so publicly as well, so a load of other people can witness this conversation. She doesn't deny that she turned her head either. It's all something. Linda is a traitor, and this is the closest thing to evidence any of them can reasonably expect to find. As a result, they get to the first round table meeting where all of them get to vote on who they want to banish, and a lot of people, including Jake, do vote for Linda. It should be pretty straightforward. Nope. You see, there's this other guy, Nathan, who is also suspicious of Linda for less conclusive reasons, but ones that still have some logic to them. Jake says his bit about Linda's head turning, and then Nathan goes, yeah, I've got suspicions too, actually.
And it looked like your heart just sank. It looked like somebody that had been picked to be a traitor that didn't want to be.
The problem is, Nathan hadn't mentioned his suspicions at all that day. It was in the morning when both Jake and Nathan witnessed their evidence against Linda. Jake took the earliest opportunity to talk to her in a public space where everybody could witness. Nathan, however, kept it to himself until the evening, only revealing it when they're back here for the purpose of discussing suspicions. Which is quite understandable. You know, why did he keep it to himself? Largely because he wasn't sure. It isn't conclusive evidence. It's easy to doubt yourself. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm putting heat on someone who's innocent? Also, this is just the first day. You don't want to stick your neck out unless you're confident, right? You're also still getting to know everybody. You know the round table is the space for talking about suspicions, so you might want to be using the rest of the time just to get to know people. Nathan understandably keeps his thoughts as something to ponder about in the back of his mind, but when he hears Jake sharing his own suspicions, naturally Nathan wants to build on that. Maybe this is nothing, Linda, but if other people are unsure about you too, perhaps I should mention this. No, he shouldn't have mentioned it. It completely flips the room here. Suddenly, everybody is suspicious of Nathan.
It feels a bit strange to say, I've not said this to anybody,
but I'm saying it now.
You've just put the seed of doubt in my head, I'm afraid.
So that's interesting. They all think it's weird and dishonest of Nathan to not share his suspicions until now. I hope you're all following this. Nathan is a faithful who decided to speak up and accidentally makes everybody think he's a traitor, and then, as a result, he's the one who gets banished over Linda. So all of that is highly irrational, right? Here's someone that two different people have evidence against. Everybody talks constantly about needing to find evidence in this show, looking for evidence. Here is as good as you're ever going to get against Linda, but because one of those people appeared a bit dishonest, suddenly he's the guilty one instead. This is the thing nobody gets about the traitors. At least the contestants never get it. How honest or dishonest a person is has absolutely no bearing on the game. Dishonesty does not equal a traitor. In fact, pretty much everyone in this game is dishonest. We've got a contestant this season named Leanne who served in the military but pretends to be a beauty technician because she thinks that makes her seem more innocent. Lisa is a priest who pretends not to be. That's all dishonesty, and none of those people are traitors. More so, everybody lies constantly to each other about who they're planning to banish. One person will ask them, "You're not planning to vote for me later, are you?" And they might say, "No, I fully trust you, I faithful," only to suddenly turn against them at the round table. That's dishonesty. And sometimes it's not even lying. It's people keeping things close to their chests that they would normally reveal, but not in this pressured social environment where everyone has got an eye on each other. They hold back certain truths and information so as not to put themselves under any kind of spotlight. You see that? Everyone in this game is dishonest. The game is designed for people to be a bit dishonest, and yet whenever anyone catches any signs of dishonesty from someone else, they instantly conclude that person must be a traitor, rather than just a faithful who is being careful with the truth. It happens time and time again in this show, and that's really interesting, I think. What does that say about the contestants? Well, first, let's take one other example, Dan. Slightly convoluted example, but I think it's a good one. He tells a lie in episode 6. They all have to play this mini-game to earn money where they put on blindfolds and secretly pick another player to have gunk poured over their heads. A player to mark. After which, the gunked player has to then guess who did it. If they guess right, the other person is eliminated from this game. If they guess wrong, they're eliminated instead. So you see, the point of the game is to pick someone who wouldn't suspect you of pouring gunk on them. Dan and Leanne, because they choose in pairs, they pick Mina to have gunk on her. And this makes some sense, because Dan is very close to Mina. Why would he pick to make a close friend suffer this? If the point is you're supposed to pick people who wouldn't suspect you, that's understandable. However, Mina then asks both of them, "Was it you?" She makes them promise it wasn't.
Do you promise?
Promise.
Promise.
I promise.
Was it you?
No.
Both of them lie because both of them don't want to be eliminated from this minigame. So again, they have good reason to lie. That's the whole point of the game they're playing right now. However, afterwards, Leanne confesses to Mina in secret that she and Dan chose her. Mina didn't like getting gunk in her hair. They underestimated just how much this would upset her, so Leanne confesses. Dan, however, opts to say nothing. And similarly, Alexander confesses to Frankie that he gunked her, but he doesn't name the other player complicit in this, which was, again, Dan. Once more, Dan opts to say nothing. Dan is being entirely dishonest, and yet it does not mean he's a traitor. You know who is a traitor though? Linda. You know who again provides pretty decent evidence that day to prove she's a traitor? Linda. That morning at breakfast, Linda discovers that the contestant Livy was murdered by the traitors the previous night. I say discovers, you know, she already knew, she did that. But she pretends to find out here and pretends to cry about it. Nobody looks convinced by this performance. There are no tears, she's never been that emotional in the past. She never seemed that close to Livy. It's very dishonest, yes, but more crucially, there's not many sensible reasons to pretend to cry about someone's elimination unless you were a traitor trying to make yourself look less guilty. Why else would someone pretend to cry here? I mean, I suppose there are some reasons, but more tenuous, less likely ones. Everybody looks very suspicious of Linda. They all talk about this at the round table that evening. It's all very compelling evidence to vote to banish Linda, and yet Dan is the one who gets banished. Dan is gone, despite the fact he does suddenly confess to Frankie when she's getting upset at the round table about who gunked her.
I'm sorry to harp on about,
being marked, okay? But if someone is lying.
Yeah.
I am giving, if you are a faithful you, the opportunity to say, it was me.
Yeah.
Why are they lying? Why are they
Let's do
lying?
it this way.
It's
There's
at
an
the moment,
evidence
it
you're a
is.
traitor.
Alexander, I look you in the eye.
Right, let me say something. It was me.
Right.
And despite him honestly admitting a very good logical reason for why he did it and why he didn't say sooner, still they decide he's a traitor and he gets banished. Like, Linda, can you stop wriggling out of banishment? How has no one caught you? How? It's so obvious. Well, yeah, there's two general points, I think, to explain this kind of behaviour. That's what we're going to do next. Are you ready?
I have voted for...
Well, Anvil!
I'm going with my gut on this, and I'm not listening to anybody else.
Oh, you better believe it's World Anvil. They are sponsoring this video, they are offering you 51% off, and they are an online tool for building worlds, you may have guessed. But also creating characters, designing and managing campaigns for all sorts of different games. My best friend uses it for D&D, but there's lots of other games. You can use it for planning your stories, writing your stories, working on all sorts of creative projects. For me, it is my novel. I need a tool like this, otherwise I am far too chaotic. We're moving flat soon and I literally have 6 cardboard boxes full of random sheets of A4 paper I've written old ideas on. Pre-World Anviled me was a nightmare. So with something like this, not only can I keep everything organised, keep it all in one place, be able to easily edit things, but I can create timelines, I can create hyperlinks branching off specific characters or articles, or a billion other things that just make it so much easier to find stuff. Planning things can be hard, especially when there's so much to do, but having all of these tools to help visualize it, to help split everything down into specific points, articles one at a time, it helps immensely. I'm not going to show you because it's a secret, but I've created different bio pages for all of the characters in my world, even the minor ones, which house they live in, what their job is, who they're friends with, who they hate, what different beliefs they have or opinions about events that go on in a book or whatever. So, World Anvil is great. I hope you can hear my passion, and if you desire, if you crave. If you call to the heavens for a 51% discount, then use the code TREE, or click the link in the description, or the pinned comment, or if you just want to try out the free version, then go for that. You know, there's no time limit on it. Test it out for as long as you want. World Anvil. Alright, we're now into the part of the video where we're talking more human behaviour, and we won't need clips from the show to much complement what I'm saying. So rather than just show meaningless shots of the traitors over and over and risk copyright claims more than I already have, let's cut to a more relaxing background provided as ever by the channel Dave's Walks, with a link to it in the description. He first let me use his videos as background way back when we both had less than 1,000 subscribers, and now look at us go. First, personal feelings overpower logic here. In both situations there is more obvious evidence against Linda, yet more personal emotion against Nathan or Dan. Linda looks very guilty, but the evidence is not a portrayal towards anyone. It causes nobody direct hurt. She turned her head towards Claudia and she pretended to cry. It's arguably dishonest, but not directly to anyone. There's no relationship involved here, no personal feelings. Does that make sense? Whereas Dan has lied to someone who was a close friend or is a close friend. Lied to two people who are both personally upset about being gunked. That was an unpleasant experience for them. It's unpleasant to know their friend did this to them. There's more emotion there, you know? A guy they have some relationship to on an issue where he directly deceives them. Logically, that's much less guilty evidence than what Linda's is, but personally, you're more affected by it. You're more motivated, more upset and angry with Dan. And similarly, Nathan had this suspicion that he told nobody about during the day. In direct contrast to Jake, who revealed his information before a bunch of people. If he appeared so open and trustworthy, why wasn't Nathan? The evidence here again comes with a little more personal feeling, a sense of why didn't you tell us before? Why didn't you trust us to know? Being dishonest in understandable ways, but also ways that bother people more, cause more annoyance, cause more upset. That's much more of a driving factor, and it's a big reason so often the faithful get things wrong in this show. Which leads us into our second point. A lot of people cry in this show. A lot of people get very upset about the little betrayals or the banishments, or when they're sitting around a table and suddenly loads of people are writing their name on a slate accusing them of being a traitor. And there's a lot of people watching this show who find that really dramatic and over the top. Overly emotional is a phrase people use that I don't like, but what those people tend not to understand is just how heightened all emotions do become in this kind of environment. All of these people are locked into a social setting for potentially 2 weeks. They're not seeing anyone else, not having outside contact, not having space away from this game that is constant. From the moment they wake up till the moment they go to bed, a relentless stress of trying to figure out something so very uncertain. Nothing distresses us quite like uncertainty. Not to mention you feel constantly on edge that you're being judged by everybody else, that your every movement is being analysed for suspicious behaviour, and all of this being done by the only people you have to consider as friends and human contact right now. That's a very intense, pressurised environment. And that kind of social environment inevitably does 2 things very, very quickly. One is that people form incredibly strong bonds with each other, which perhaps sounds counterintuitive. You know, the whole purpose of this game is to not trust anyone, to be prepared to banish and backstab each other, and yet they do form bonds. Even the traitors themselves, who come into this game so very excited to deceive and murder other contestants, they quickly grow very close to them and start to be weighed with a huge guilt about what they're doing. They all become very close because this is their society right now, this is their tribe. And when you are pressured by so much uncertainty, you become desperate for somebody, some people at least you can trust and rely on. You need that as a relief, as a breather from all of the lack of it in this game. In this environment, that kind of trust is the only psychological defense they have against the total uncertainty they're burdened with, you know? So naturally, when moments come where you realise someone you have felt close to has been dishonest in certain ways, whether it makes them a traitor or not, that dishonesty hurts 10 times more than it ordinarily should. Because you have no perspective on the situation. I think give them a day to step out of the game and Frankie would likely remember, yeah, Dan's behaviour makes sense, this is just a game, I do understand. But because she doesn't have that perspective, she can't easily contain or step back from the sense of betrayal, and so it overrules her judgment. She is very, very angry and upset about what is basically just a prank from a friend, pouring gunk on them because it helps them in this game and it's a bit of a laugh, you know? Within the game, it feels so much more serious than that. And that is probably what's most fascinating about this show, the fact that despite a setting designed specifically for them to not trust anyone, a lot of the time they can't help but trust and become very close to at least some of the people there. That's oddly wholesome element of this show, contrasted with the unpleasant stress and anger that can then arise. Occasionally it becomes a little nasty. I don't enjoy when it becomes like that, but I think the show does a pretty good job behind the scenes of looking after its contestants, at least as far as I can infer. So what's the lesson then? Well, there is uncertainty itself, as is often true of so much in life. The better you can bear the emotion of uncertainty, the more capably and effectively you'll be able to function. There's obviously dishonesty. It does not correlate with being a traitor, and actually, whilst the reverse isn't strictly true, it's arguably the contestants who appear the most honest and most trustworthy that are the most likely to be traitors. Because the traitors' top priority in this game is to keep their identities hidden, to not look suspicious, to not be under the spotlight. They are the most motivated to make sure everybody trusts them. And whilst the faithful are obviously motivated to do the same as well, their top priority tends to instead be finding the traitors. Plus, they know themselves to be innocent. They are then less likely to be defensive and less likely to be as on edge about their own behaviour, and consequently then more likely to speak with less of a filter, to act more openly because they're not expecting people to be as suspicious of them. Does that make sense? The contestant Kasim foolishly but quite innocently decides to stand up and raise a glass in toast to a contestant who was murdered. He does it because he feels it's a nice thing to do, but it makes people suspicious of him. Had that been his primary motivation, to make myself not look suspicious, he probably wouldn't have stood up and done such an odd thing. Because he's not a traitor, because he's not as pressured to seem trustworthy, he is more likely to make ordinary human blunders. You know, logically doing something so overtly suspicious as this should make him appear more innocent. Whereas you should think no traitor would be so stupid to put themselves under the spotlight like that, but that's not how they tend to process this. But yes, despite various exceptions, the ones who appeared the least dishonest are the most likely to be traitors. And then thirdly, you have to expect to be deceived by the people you trust. You have to try and keep perspective on the situation, hold in mind the awareness that everybody has reasons to lie, and that you can't afford to take it too personally. You have to try your best not to let that emotion cloud your judgment. The question should never be who personally do I trust the least, but instead perhaps who logically has the least understandable reasons to deceive. Or even, if this thing they've done is a deception, what would a traitor actually gain from that? And that question set against what would they gain from it if they were a faithful. You know, The Traitors is a game show where most of the time nobody has any idea what to think, and that experience of not knowing is unpleasant and unbearable, so they very often leap at anything they have to spare them that feeling, which so often boils down to trust. I think Mina says it best in answer to Dan.
Regardless of what happens tonight, I cannot trust you. I really cannot trust you, whether you're a traitor or a faithful, because of how you've conducted yourself.
Fundamentally, that has nothing to do with if he's a traitor or not. Nothing to do with how the game works, and yet so often it's the driving motivation behind who gets banished and who doesn't. It's why sometimes, very unpleasantly, but also interestingly, the game falls into very unfair biases, which would be its own can of worms to discuss in its own video. This game show should have nothing to do with trust itself. Finding traitors technically has nothing to do with that, and yet it plays a hand in absolutely everything that happens. Because, as humans, kind of wonderfully, it's a thing we all need. Maybe that's me, but I do find that kind of life-affirming. Even in a setting where trusting people is a terrible, terrible idea, they can't help it, and then can't also help the betrayal of that trust clouding their judgment. Those are basically my thoughts. I hope it's of some interest. I don't know, comment what you think. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe, maybe support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Grace, Kellyanne Davidson, Luke Orr, Michael Gallagher, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.